What if I told you that waking up in medieval Europe meant playing Russian roulette with breakfast? Tonight, we're diving into 4 survival stories where your morning meal had a 50% chance of killing you before lunch. Picture yourself opening your eyes in 1347, and the first thing you smell is death. The second thing, also death. The third, death with a hint of breakfast. Welcome to Tuesday morning in paradise, where your daily bread was literally trying to murder you. We're exploring 4 aspects of medieval survival that will redefine everything you think you know about human endurance. Food that was designed to poison you, housing that was optimized to kill you, medicine that was professionally calibrated for elimination, and somehow, impossibly, the transcendent love that built civilization anyway. Allow your modern worries to melt away as we journey through humanity's most fascinating survival experiment. You're about to discover that you're descended from people who proved humans are literally indestructible. Comment your time zone and tell me, what's the worst thing you've ever had for breakfast? And if you enjoy historically horrifying bedtime stories that somehow end with hope, I warmly invite you to subscribe so you never miss our adventures into the impossible resilience of human nature. Let's begin with the simple question: how do you survive breakfast when your bread contains sawdust, sand, and natural LSD? Picture yourself waking up in a medieval European village in 1347. You open your eyes, and the first thing you smell is death. The second thing, also death. The third, death with a hint of breakfast. Welcome to Tuesday morning in paradise. Here's your wake-up call. You have a 50% chance of surviving until lunch. Not because of war, not because of accidents, because of breakfast. Your morning meal is actively trying to murder you, and everyone knows it. Let me tell you about medieval bread. You think you know bread. You don't know anything. Medieval bakers mixed their flour with sawdust, chalk, ground bones, and sand. Sand! They looked at bread and thought, you know what this needs? More rocks. But here's the part that'll blow your mind. This wasn't corner cutting. This was the recipe. The official, government-approved, church-blessed recipe included construction materials. Why? Because pure grain was too expensive for humans to eat. Think about that for a second. Bread, literally the most basic food in human history, was too good for people to have. But wait, it gets worse, much worse. The grain they did use was infected with ergot, a fungus that's basically natural LSD mixed with rat poison. Eating your daily bread meant rolling the dice on whether you'd spend the day hallucinating or dying. Sometimes both. There are recorded cases of entire villages going insane from their breakfast, whole communities tripping out of their minds because someone had to eat. Here's what historians don't tell you. Medieval people knew this. They weren't ignorant. They understood that their food was killing them. But the alternative was starving immediately instead of poisoning slowly. So they chose the slow death every single day. Your morning porridge? That wasn't food. That was a biology experiment. One pot, shared by the entire village. Never fully cleaned. Constantly topped up with whatever hadn't achieved consciousness yet. Scientists today call this a perfect breeding ground for every pathogen known to humanity. Medieval people called it breakfast. The water situation was even more insane. Rivers were open sewers. Wells were contaminated death traps. The only safe thing to drink was weak ale. For breakfast, children as young as 3 were drinking alcohol with their morning meal because water would kill them faster. Let that sink in. Toddlers were alcoholics by necessity. But here's the moment that made me put down my research and stare at the wall. In 1315, during the Great Famine, parents were selling their children for bread, not metaphorically, literally. Church records show transactions where people traded kids for loaves. A 7-year-old boy was worth approximately 4 pounds of that sawdust sand-poisoned bread. And that was considered a fair trade. This isn't ancient history. This isn't caveman times. This is 700 years ago. Your ancestors, 28 generations back, were making these choices: bread or children, poison or starvation, madness or death. The miracle isn't that they survived. The miracle is that they stayed human while doing it. But surviving breakfast was just the warm-up round. The real mathematical nightmare came when they had to calculate whether they'd have enough food to make it through winter. You've survived breakfast. Congratulations! Your digestive system is now hosting what medieval doctors called balanced humours and what we'd call biological warfare. Now comes the fun part, the hunger math. Here's your equation. You need 3,000 calories a day to survive medieval physical labour. You have access to maybe 100-200 calories on a good day. Solve for how many weeks until your body starts eating itself? The answer? 6 weeks. After 6 weeks of medieval rationing, your muscles begin dissolving to keep your brain alive. Let me paint you the portion reality. Your daily bread ration was 2 pounds of that rock sand mixture we discussed. That's it. That's 75% of your entire diet for the day. Not 75% of your carbs, 75% of everything you would put in your mouth until the sun came up again. The remaining 25% was what they called pottage, which was whatever hadn't run away, died of natural causes, or achieved sentience thrown into a pot with water. Grass soup was Tuesday. Tree bark broth was Wednesday's special. And if God was smiling on your village, maybe some turnips that weren't actively rotting. Here's what destroyed my brain when I found this in the historical records. Medieval people became cannibals, not occasionally, systematically. During famines, which happened every 3 to 4 years, human flesh was categorized in official church documents as emergency rations. They had rules about it. Protocols. The church actually debated whether eating your neighbours violated the Sabbath or just regular Christian doctrine. They developed a whole science around who you could eat first. But here's where the math becomes truly evil. Your harvest had to last 8 months, September to May. You're looking at your grain pile in September, doing calculations that would make an accountant weep. How thin can you stretch the gruel? How many days can a human survive on water with 3 barley grains floating in it? The answer, by the way, is 23 days. They tested this extensively. Winter was when villages played roulette with mathematics. In a typical village of 100 people, 30 would be dead by spring, every year. This wasn't a disaster. This was the system working as designed. The food supply was calculated to kill approximately 1/3 of the population annually. They called it God's will. We'd call it systematic elimination. But here's what'll keep you up at night. They knew exactly what they were doing. Medieval lords had detailed charts showing optimal population numbers for maximum efficiency. Too many people, not enough food. Too few people, not enough labour. The sweet spot. Just enough starvation to keep everyone desperate, but not quite enough to kill everyone. It was genocide by spreadsheet, 700 years before spreadsheets existed. The most diabolical part, even if you saved enough food for winter, there was no guarantee you'd live to eat it. Disease, accidents, and what they cheerfully called acts of God could wipe out months of careful starvation management in a single afternoon. They turned hunger into a community survival strategy, which sounds impossible until you understand the horrifying genius of how medieval villages actually shared. You've made it through the hunger math. Your body is now running on fumes, prayer, and whatever that mysterious substance in the pottage was. Time for the next challenge. dinner. Here's the thing about medieval food preservation. It was designed to kill you slowly instead of quickly. They called it improvement. Let me tell you about salt. You know salt, right? That stuff you sprinkle on French fries? In medieval times, salt was worth more than human life. Literally. Church records show that a pound of salt cost the same as 3 months of peasant labour, which means preserving one pig required a peasant family to work for free for almost a year. So they got creative with preservation. And by creative, I mean they invented ways to make food more dangerous than just letting it rot. Smoking meat? Sounds reasonable until you realize they used whatever wood they could find, including poisonous trees. Yew wood was popular because it burned well. It also contains taxine, which causes cardiac arrest. They were literally flavoring their food with heart attack smoke. But here's where it gets truly insane. They knew this was killing people. Medieval medical texts specifically warn about wood sickness from improperly smoked meat. The solution? Eat it anyway and pray harder. Fermenting was even worse. They'd bury meat in the ground for months, let bacteria do whatever bacteria wanted to do, then dig it up and call it aged. The smell was so horrific that visitors to medieval villages could detect them from miles away. Not because of poor hygiene, because of the intentional food rot happening in every backyard. Here's what broke my brain when I found this in the records. In 1342, the city of Florence passed laws requiring people to bury their fermented meat at least 6 feet deep because the smell was literally killing horses. Horses! Animals that roll in their own waste were dying from medieval food preservation odours. They were creating biological weapons and calling them dinner. But the real nightmare was fish. Medieval people ate more fish than almost any other protein, but they had no idea how to preserve it safely. They'd pack fish in salt when they could afford it, or just let them dry in the sun while flies did their thing. The result was protein that was roughly 30% fish, 70% maggots. They had a saying, fresh maggots mean fresh fish. They were using insect infestation as a quality control system. The preservation process was so toxic that medieval people developed what they called fish sickness, which we now know was a combination of food poisoning, parasite infection, and mercury poisoning from eating contaminated fish. Symptoms included hallucinations, tremors, and what medieval doctors described as the dancing death. People were literally dying from dinner and dancing while they did it. Here's the moment that made me question everything. Medieval people developed tolerance to food poisoning. Not resistance, tolerance. Their bodies adapted to being slowly poisoned every single day. Children were born with digestive systems that could handle levels of bacterial contamination that would hospitalize a modern person within hours. They evolved to survive their own food supply. But even with superhuman poison tolerance, medieval people were still playing Russian roulette with every meal. Because preservation wasn't just about making food last. It was about making food that would kill you slower than starvation would. The math was simple. Eat poison and die in months, or don't eat and die in days. They chose months, every time. But if you think poisoned food was bad, wait until you learn about medieval water, because what they were drinking made their food look like a health spa. You've survived breakfast and dinner. Your digestive system has now achieved what medieval doctors called divine resilience, and what we'd call a medical miracle that defies modern understanding. Time to hydrate. Good luck. Here's your medieval beverage menu. Contaminated river water, contaminated well water, contaminated rainwater, or weak ale. Choose your poison, literally. Medieval rivers weren't rivers. They were open sewers with delusions of grandeur. Every village, every town, every city dumped everything directly into the water. Human waste, animal waste, dead bodies, industrial runoff from leather tanning, and whatever the local butcher felt like contributing that day. The Thames River in London was so toxic that fish couldn't survive in it. Not some fish, all fish. The entire ecosystem was dead, but people still drank from it because the alternative was dying of thirst. But rivers were clean compared to wells. Medieval well water was a science experiment in bacterial cultivation. They'd dig a hole, line it with stones if they were feeling fancy, and hope for the best. No filtration, no treatment, no understanding of groundwater contamination. They were basically drinking from underground cesspools that they'd accidentally connected to every latrine within a mile radius. Here's what destroyed my faith in human survival. Medieval people knew their water was killing them. They could see the correlation between drinking water and getting sick. Medical texts from the period specifically warn about water sickness, but they kept drinking it anyway because the human body needs water to function. They chose death by contamination over death by dehydration. But here's where it gets truly horrific. During the Black Death, when people were dying so fast they couldn't bury them, they just threw bodies into wells, not accidentally, intentionally. The logic was that dead people were already contaminated, so contaminated water couldn't make them more dead. They weaponized their own water supply against disease. The result? Medieval people developed what historians call liquid plague delivery systems. Every well, every river, every water source became a distribution network for whatever pestilence was trendy that season. So they invented alternatives, and by alternatives, I mean they created beverages that were somehow even more dangerous than the contaminated water. Small ale, weak beer with just enough alcohol to kill some bacteria became the default beverage for everyone, including babies. Medieval infants were weaned onto alcohol because breast milk was safer than water, but only until the mother's milk dried up. Then it was straight to baby beer. 3-year-olds had better alcohol tolerance than modern college students. But ale production required grain, and grain was needed for food, so medieval people had to choose: eat bread or drink safe beverages, starve or dehydrate. There was no option that didn't involve dying slowly. The most insane part? They got creative with water purification. Boiling water was known to make it safer, but fuel was expensive. So they developed what they called blessed water. They'd have priests pray over contaminated water and call it clean. They tried to cure bacteria with prayer. Actually, that's not fair. Some medieval people understood that boiling helped. But boiling water required wood. Wood was needed for heating and cooking, and winter was always coming. So they had to calculate, use fuel to purify water and freeze to death, or drink contaminated water and die of disease. They chose disease every time. Here's what kept me awake after reading this. In a typical medieval village, clean drinking water was so rare that when someone found a truly clean spring, it was considered a miracle. Literally. The Catholic Church would send investigators to determine if divine intervention was involved. Clean water was so impossible they thought God had to personally intervene to make it happen. But even with supernatural intervention, you still had to live somewhere. And medieval housing made contaminated water look like a luxury resort. You've survived medieval food and water. Your immune system has achieved legendary status. Your digestive tract has become a biological weapon, and your liver is basically a medieval superhero. Time to meet your roommates, the rats. Medieval villages weren't inhabited by humans who occasionally had rat problems. They were inhabited by rats who occasionally had human problems. Here's the ratio that'll blow your mind. In a typical medieval village of 100 humans, there were approximately 2,000 rats. That's 20 rats per person, not 20 rats per family, 20 rats per individual human being. You didn't own your house. The rats owned your house. You were just the large, warm-blooded creature they allowed to live there in exchange for dropping food constantly. But here's where it gets truly insane. Medieval people didn't see this as a problem. They saw it as an economic system. Rats were protein. Rats were fur. Rats were pest control for smaller pests. The medieval economy was partially based on rat harvesting. There were professional rat catchers who made their living selling rat meat to butchers and rat fur to clothing makers. They turned infestation into industry. Let me paint you the reality of medieval rat cohabitation. You'd wake up in the morning and rats would be in your bed. Not near your bed, in your bed, sleeping with you. Sharing your body heat because medieval houses were so cold that even rats needed to huddle with humans for survival. Your breakfast? Rats had eaten half of it during the night. Your clothes? Rats had nested in them. Your hair? Well, let's just say medieval people developed some very specific combing techniques. But the real horror was the rat intelligence. Medieval rats were smarter than modern rats because they had to be. They lived in a constant war zone where humans were actively trying to kill them, poison them, and trap them. So they evolved. Medieval rats could open simple latches. They could work together to move objects too heavy for individual rats. They developed complex social hierarchies with guard rats, scout rats, and specialized food procurement teams. They were running military operations against humans, and they were winning. Here's what broke my brain. Medieval people developed rat calendars. They tracked rat breeding cycles, rat migration patterns, and rat population explosions. They had to plan their entire agricultural year around rat behavior because rats would eat 30–40% of every harvest. Humans were the minority species in their own food production system. But the most diabolical part was winter. During cold months, rats would move indoors en masse. Not dozens of rats, hundreds. Entire rat cities would relocate into human houses, creating a situation where people were outnumbered 50–1 in their own homes. Medieval houses in winter weren't houses. They were rat parliaments where humans were allowed to attend. The horror stories are documented in church records because people confessed their rat-related sins to priests, like the time in 1348 when a family in Yorkshire woke up to find rats had eaten their baby's fingers while the child was sleeping. Or the recorded case in France where rats chewed through a wooden crucifix and people debated whether this was sacrilege or just Tuesday. They had theological debates about rat behavior. But here's the moment that made me understand medieval resilience. Instead of being defeated by the rat economy, humans adapted to it. They learned to sleep in shifts so someone was always awake to guard against rat attacks. They developed clothing that rats couldn't chew through. They created food storage systems that rats couldn't penetrate. They turned rat warfare into a survival skill. The most incredible part: medieval children grew up thinking this was normal. Kids would play games based on rat behavior, tell stories about rat adventures, and develop friendships with specific rats they recognized. They turned biological warfare into childhood entertainment. But as horrific as the rat economy was, it was nothing compared to what winter did to an already impossible survival situation. You've made it to winter. Congratulations. You've survived poisoned food, contaminated water, and biological warfare with rats. Now comes the final boss: medieval winter. Here's your situation. You have roughly 60% of the calories you need to survive until spring. Your house has no insulation, no heating system, and approximately the thermal efficiency of a tent made of ice. The temperature outside is below freezing for the next 4 months. Solve 4. How does an entire civilization not die? The answer will redefine everything you think you know about human endurance. Medieval winter wasn't cold. It was an extinction event that happened annually. Temperatures that would shut down modern cities were just Tuesday in medieval Europe. For 4 to 5 months, survival became a mathematical impossibility that somehow kept working. Here's the thermal reality. Medieval houses lost heat so fast that lighting a fire was like trying to heat the outdoors. They'd burn through their entire wood supply in 2 weeks if they tried to keep warm. So they developed what historians call strategic freezing. They chose which parts of their bodies to keep warm and which parts to let freeze. Medieval people slept in groups of 8 to 12 because individual body heat wasn't enough to prevent death. Not just families. Entire neighborhoods would pile into the largest house and sleep together in shifts. Privacy was a luxury that would literally kill you. But here's where it gets truly insane. They shared body heat with animals. Cows, pigs, goats, and chickens all lived inside the house during winter. Not in a separate room, in the same room where humans slept, ate, and lived. Your bedroom was a barn, and your barn was a bedroom. The smell was indescribable. The hygiene situation was apocalyptic, but it worked. Animal body heat combined with human body heat created just enough warmth to prevent everyone from freezing to death in their sleep. They turned their homes into biological heating systems. Food rationing in winter was mathematical torture. You had to calculate how many calories you could consume today without starving to death in March. Too much food now meant death later. Too little food now meant death sooner. Every meal was a gamble with starvation. Here's what destroyed my understanding of human psychology. Medieval people developed winter games. Not despite the horror of winter survival, but because of it. They created elaborate storytelling competitions, singing contests, and memory games specifically designed to make people forget they were slowly dying. They turned survival into entertainment. The most brutal part was what they called the starving time. The 6 weeks before spring harvest, when food stores were completely exhausted. Medieval people routinely went 40+ days eating nothing but melted snow and whatever they could strip from trees. For 6 weeks every year, entire villages practiced controlled starvation. But here's the moment that redefined my understanding of human resilience. They planned for this. Medieval people didn't just survive the starving time. They developed sophisticated strategies for it. They'd identify which community members were most likely to survive extreme starvation and prioritize their food allocation. They'd calculate optimal caloric distribution for maximum community survival. They turned mass starvation into a science. The survival rate was horrific. In a typical medieval village, 20–30% of the population would die every winter, every year, for centuries. This wasn't a disaster. This was normal life. They accepted annual population decimation as the cost of being alive. But here's what will blow your mind. They didn't just survive this system. They built civilization on top of it. While playing survival roulette every winter, medieval people also created art, music, literature, and the social foundations that became modern Europe. They turned systematic dying into cultural renaissance. The most incredible part, children born into this system developed superhuman cold tolerance. Medieval kids could function in temperatures that would hospitalize modern adults. They evolved biological antifreeze. They became a different species of human just to stay alive. And somehow, impossibly, they found ways to make even winter survival feel like community. But if winter was the ultimate test of medieval resilience, their housing situation was where the true genius of human adaptation revealed itself. You've survived the medieval food system. Your digestive tract has achieved legendary status. Your immune system could probably stop a plague, and you've developed a working relationship with 20 personal rats. Time to find somewhere to live. Here's your housing budget. 0. your building materials, whatever you can find lying around, your architectural plans, stay alive until tomorrow. Your privacy expectations, abandon them now. Welcome to medieval real estate, where the motto was, if it doesn't kill you immediately, it's luxury housing. Let me paint you the picture of your new home. It's roughly 16 feet by 20 feet. That's 320 square feet total. For comparison, a modern prison cell is 80 square feet for one person. You're about to share 320 square feet with your spouse, your children, your elderly parents, and whatever livestock you own. Oh, and those 20 rats we mentioned. They get equal living rights. The walls are made of wattle and daub, basically wooden sticks held together with mud, straw and animal dung. When I say animal dung, I mean whatever was available. Cow dung was premium building material. Horse dung was acceptable. Human dung was, well, sometimes it was all you had. Your house was literally held together with shit. But here's what broke my brain when I found this in the architectural records. This wasn't poor construction. This was the optimal medieval building technology. Engineers had calculated the exact ratio of mud to manure that would provide maximum structural integrity while minimizing cost. They had turned waste management into structural engineering. The roof was thatched, essentially dried grass laid thick enough to keep most of the rain out. Most of the rain. During storms. Your house became an indoor water feature. Medieval people didn't have buckets to catch drips because buckets were expensive. They had designated family members whose job was to stand under leaks and absorb water. They used children as human umbrellas. But here's where it gets truly medieval. There were no windows. Not small windows, no windows. Glass was more expensive than gold, and leaving holes in your walls meant freezing to death. So you lived in perpetual darkness, breathing air that hadn't been refreshed since the house was built. Your home was a windowless cave made of manure and sticks. Lighting, you had a few options, all terrible. Candles were luxury items reserved for the wealthy. Oil lamps required oil, which required money. Your realistic lighting option was fire on a stick, basically controlled house fires that you hoped wouldn't become uncontrolled house fires. Medieval people lived by firelight, which sounds romantic, until you realize they were constantly playing Russian roulette with accidental combustion. The most insane part was the foundation, or rather, the complete lack of foundation. Medieval houses were built directly on the ground, not stone foundations, not raised platforms, just dirt. When it rained, your floor became mud. When it flooded, your house became a temporary lake with furniture. They built their homes inside natural swimming pools. But here's what destroyed my understanding of human adaptability. Medieval people didn't see this as suffering. They saw it as normal. Children grew up thinking that living in dark, muddy, manure-reinforced caves with 20 rats was just what houses were. They had no concept that shelter could be anything other than controlled outdoor camping. The truly diabolical part. This wasn't the result of ignorance or poverty. This was the result of an economic system that had calculated the exact minimum shelter requirements for human survival and built to those specifications. Medieval housing wasn't accidentally terrible. It was optimally terrible. Your landlord wasn't trying to house you comfortably. Your landlord was trying to keep you alive just long enough to extract maximum labor while investing minimum resources in your survival infrastructure. But if you think the basic structure was challenging, wait until you learn what happened when you tried to share this space with other human beings. You've moved into your new medieval home. It's dark, muddy, held together with animal waste, and shares space with a thriving rat civilization. Time to meet your roommates, everyone. Here's your privacy situation. You have none. Not limited privacy, zero privacy. The concept didn't exist. Medieval people had a word for someone who wanted to be alone. Witch. Seriously, Desiring solitude was considered evidence of supernatural evil. Your 320 square foot home houses an average of 12 people. Not 12 people including children. 12 adults, plus however many children survived infancy. We're talking about 15, 20 human beings sharing less space than a modern studio apartment. But here's where it gets truly medieval. There were no private rooms, no walls inside the house, no curtains, no partitions, no separate spaces. Everyone lived, slept, ate, and existed in one single room together. Welcome to the medieval open concept lifestyle, where open concept meant nowhere to hide from anyone ever. Let me walk you through your sleeping arrangements. Everyone sleeps on the floor, not individual beds, the floor. The family would lay down straw, animal hides if they were wealthy, and everyone would arrange themselves like puzzle pieces across the ground. Married couples had sex while surrounded by children, elderly parents, and whatever relatives were visiting. Medieval people developed the ability to be intimate while 15 other people were pretending to sleep 3 feet away. They turned reproduction into a community event. But the real horror was personal hygiene. You know that phrase, washing your dirty laundry in public? Medieval people did that literally. All personal grooming, all clothing changes, all bodily maintenance happened in full view of everyone else in the house. Medieval teenagers went through puberty with an audience. Bathroom needs? There wasn't a bathroom. There was a pot in the corner that everyone used in full view of everyone else. When it filled up, someone, usually the youngest able-bodied person, had to carry it outside and empty it. They had designated family members whose job was professional waste management. Here's what destroyed my concept of human dignity. Medieval people developed elaborate social protocols for pretending not to notice intimate activities. They created an entire etiquette system based on selective blindness and strategic deafness. They invented psychological privacy when physical privacy was impossible. But the most insane part was disease transmission. When one person got sick, everyone got sick. Not just family members, everyone. Medieval houses were biological distribution centers for whatever plague was trendy that season. Your home was a viral breeding facility with furniture. Medieval people knew this. Medical texts from the period specifically warn about house sickness and the dangers of shared living spaces. But individual housing was economically impossible. So they developed what historians call community immunity strategies. They treated disease outbreaks like weather, inevitable natural disasters that required group preparation rather than individual prevention. The most brutal aspect was conflict resolution. When 20 people live in 320 square feet, arguments aren't private disputes, they're community crises. Medieval families developed sophisticated mediation systems because personal conflicts could literally tear apart the survival infrastructure. They turned family therapy into survival necessity. But here's the moment that redefined my understanding of human social adaptation. Despite having zero privacy, medieval people still found ways to maintain individual identity, personal relationships, and emotional intimacy. They created privacy through timing, through subtle communication, through shared understanding that certain moments were not seen even when physically visible. They invented mental privacy when physical privacy was mathematically impossible. The most incredible part, medieval children who grew up in this system developed supernatural social intelligence. They could read micro-expressions, navigate complex group dynamics, and maintain emotional stability in situations that would break modern adults. They evolved into social survival experts. But if sharing space with humans was challenging, sharing space with animals turned medieval houses into something beyond modern comprehension. You've accepted that privacy is extinct, and that you'll be spending your entire life surrounded by other humans in various states of undress, illness, and emotional breakdown. Time to meet your other roommates, the livestock. Your medieval house isn't just a human dwelling, it's a full-service barn that occasionally accommodates people. During winter, your living room becomes home to cows, pigs, goats, chickens, and whatever other animals you need to keep alive until spring. Welcome to the medieval mixed species commune. Here's the space allocation. Humans get one end of the house, animals get the other end, and there's no wall between them, not a small partition, no separation at all. You're literally sharing breathing space with livestock. Your bedroom soundtrack is a symphony of mooing, oinking, clucking, and whatever sounds goats make when they're contemplating existence. But here's where it gets truly insane. This wasn't poverty. This was sophisticated thermal engineering. Medieval people calculated that animal body heat combined with human body heat would raise the interior temperature just enough to prevent everyone from freezing to death. They turned their livestock into biological heating systems. Let me paint you the aromatic reality. You've got cow manure, pig waste, chicken droppings, goat excrement, and human bodily functions all happening in the same enclosed space with no ventilation. The smell wasn't just bad, it was a biological weapon that medieval people had built tolerance for. They developed superhuman olfactory endurance just to stay alive. Medieval children learned to walk by stepping around chicken droppings and cow patties. Their first words were often animal sounds because that's what they heard most often. They learned to sleep through pig snoring and cow digestion. They were raised by a village that included actual livestock as parenting partners. But the real horror was hygiene. Medieval people shared their food with animals, and animals shared their parasites with humans. Your breakfast porridge had chicken feathers in it. Your bed had pig hair woven into the straw. Your clothes were permanently infused with goat fur. You weren't just living with animals, you were slowly becoming one. Here's what broke my brain when I found this in the records. Medieval people developed communication systems with their livestock. They had specific calls for individual cows, personal relationships with particular pigs, and emotional bonds with chickens. They treated farm animals like roommates because that's exactly what they were. The most diabolical part was animal discipline. When your cow misbehaved, you couldn't just move it to a different room. There was only one room. So medieval families developed complex behavioral management systems that applied equally to children and livestock. Medieval parents used the same parenting techniques on kids and goats. Disease transmission became exponentially complicated. Animals carried diseases that humans could catch. Humans carried diseases that animals could catch. And everyone was sharing the same air, water, and living space. Your immune system had to adapt to threats from multiple species simultaneously. But here's the moment that redefined my understanding of human adaptability. Medieval people didn't just tolerate this arrangement, they optimized it. They bred animals specifically for indoor living, developed feeding schedules that minimized indoor waste, and created behavioral training that allowed different species to coexist peacefully. They turned interspecies cohabitation into a survival science. The most incredible part was the emotional relationships that developed. Medieval people formed genuine friendships with their animals, relied on them for emotional support during harsh winters, and mourned their deaths as family losses. They created interspecies families because survival required all available resources, emotional and otherwise. Medieval children grew up bilingual. They spoke human and animal. They could interpret cow moods, predict pig behavior, and communicate with chickens. They developed empathy that extended across species boundaries. They became human-animal interpreters just to manage their living situation. But if sharing your bedroom with farm animals was complex, the heating situation turned medieval houses into controlled fire hazards. You're now living in a windowless cave made of manure with 20 humans and assorted livestock, breathing air that hasn't been fresh since construction began. Time to tackle heating, the daily choice between freezing to death or burning to death. Here's your medieval heating equation. Wood is expensive, fire is dangerous, and insulation is non-existent. Every day, you calculate whether you can afford to burn enough fuel to not die of hypothermia without accidentally incinerating everyone you've ever loved. Welcome to Thermal Russian Roulette. Your heating system is a fire pit in the center of your one room, not a fireplace with a chimney, a literal hole in the ground with fire in it, surrounded by highly flammable straw, wooden furniture, and whatever clothing you own. You're essentially living inside a campfire waiting to happen. The smoke has nowhere to go except up through a hole in the roof, if you're wealthy enough to afford a hole in the roof. Most medieval houses just filled with smoke until it found its way out through cracks in the walls or gaps in the thatch. Medieval people spent winter in a constant state of controlled asphyxiation. Here's what destroyed my understanding of human tolerance. Medieval people developed the ability to function while breathing air that was roughly 30% smoke. They could work, eat, sleep, and raise children in atmospheric conditions that would trigger modern fire department evacuations. They evolved into smoke-breathing humans. Fuel management was mathematical torture. You needed enough wood to prevent death by freezing. But burning too much meant you'd run out before spring and die of freezing later. Every log was a calculation. Immediate warmth versus future survival. They played thermal chess with their own mortality. But here's where it gets truly medieval. They burned everything. Furniture, clothing, shoes, tools. When the temperature dropped low enough, anything combustible became potential fuel. Medieval people would literally burn their beds to avoid freezing to death in their sleep. They had emergency protocols for converting their entire living environment into heating fuel. The most insane part was fire safety. With everyone sleeping around an open fire pit, accidental burns were a daily reality. Medieval people developed specialized sleeping positions designed to minimize fire exposure while maximizing heat absorption. They turned sleep into a fire management strategy. Fire maintenance was a 24-hour community responsibility. Someone had to stay awake all night to keep the fire alive because letting it die meant everyone might freeze before they could restart it in the morning. Families developed fire-watching schedules like military guard duty. Medieval people treated their heating system like nuclear reactor maintenance. But here's what broke my brain. Medieval houses burned down constantly, not occasionally, constantly. Village records show that the average medieval house burned down every 7 to 10 years. This wasn't considered a disaster. It was considered maintenance. They accepted regular house fires as the cost of not freezing to death. When houses burned down, the entire village would help rebuild because everyone knew their house would be next. Medieval communities developed standardized house fire response protocols because structural combustion was as predictable as seasons. They turned accidental arson into community planning events. The most diabolical aspect was clothing management. You couldn't wear too many clothes near the fire because they'd catch fire. You couldn't wear too few clothes because you'd freeze. Medieval people had to calculate optimal clothing density for fire proximity survival. They developed fashion based on combustion mathematics. Here's the moment that redefined my understanding of human resilience. Despite living in constant fire hazard conditions, medieval people still found ways to create warmth that went beyond physical heat. They developed social warming strategies, community activities, shared storytelling, group singing that generated psychological heat when physical heat was insufficient. They invented emotional heating systems. The most incredible part, medieval people who survived these heating conditions developed supernatural cold tolerance. They could function in temperatures that would hospitalize modern humans while maintaining fine motor skills and cognitive function. They became a cold-resistant subspecies of human. But if heating was playing with fire, Medieval sanitation turned daily life into biological warfare. You're living in a smoke-filled cave with 20 humans and assorted farm animals, managing a fire that's constantly trying to kill everyone, breathing air that's 30% carbon monoxide. Time to address the bathroom situation. Spoiler alert, there is no bathroom situation. Here's your sanitation reality. Toilets don't exist. Not primitive toilets. No toilets. The concept of dedicated waste disposal areas is a luxury your civilization hasn't invented yet. Welcome to medieval waste management, where every day is bring your own bathroom day. Your toilet is a wooden bucket in the corner of your one room. Not in a separate corner room, in the corner of the room where you eat, sleep, and exist. Everyone uses the same bucket. Everyone watches everyone else use the same bucket. Privacy died and took dignity with it. The bucket doesn't have a lid because lids are expensive. It doesn't get emptied daily because emptying it is horrible. It sits there, accumulating contents from multiple humans and whatever animals decided to contribute, slowly fermenting into what medieval people called chamber music. Your bathroom was a biological percussion instrument. But here's where it gets truly medieval. Emptying the bucket was a family event. Someone had to carry liquid human waste through your living space, out the door, and to whatever disposal area the village had designated. Usually, this job went to children because adults had learned to develop sudden urgent responsibilities whenever bucket duty arose. Medieval parents trained their kids in hazardous waste management. The disposal site, your garden. Medieval people used human waste as fertilizer because they discovered that vegetables grew better in enriched soil. They were recycling their bodily functions into food production without understanding the bacterial implications. They turned breakfast into next year's breakfast through biological alchemy. Village waste management was community terrorism. When multiple families lived close together, everyone's bathroom buckets had to be emptied in the same general area. Medieval villages developed designated shit fields where the entire community's waste was concentrated. They created biological disaster zones as city planning. But here's what destroyed my faith in medieval survival. They knew this was making them sick. Medical texts from the period specifically warn about waste sickness and the dangers of poor sanitation. But individual waste disposal was economically impossible, so they accepted disease as the cost of having somewhere to defecate. They chose guaranteed illness over waste disposal infrastructure. Toilet paper? Let me introduce you to the medieval alternatives: straw, leaves, cloth rags that got reused, or the most popular option, your hand. Medieval people developed sophisticated hand-cleaning rituals because their hands were their primary sanitation tools. They turned personal hygiene into elaborate washing ceremonies. The most insane part was winter waste management. When it was too cold to go outside, the bucket situation became exponentially worse. Medieval families would accumulate weeks' worth of human waste inside their living space because the alternative was freezing to death during bathroom breaks. They chose to live in waste storage facilities rather than risk hypothermia. Here's what broke my brain when I found this in the records. Medieval people developed waste-based weather prediction systems. They could tell atmospheric pressure changes and predict storms based on how their waste buckets smelled. They turned excrement into meteorological instruments. Disease transmission through poor sanitation was so common that medieval people developed specific prayers for bathroom-related illnesses. The Catholic Church had official blessings for dysentery, cholera, and what they called waste fever. They needed divine intervention for toilet problems. But the most diabolical aspect was social etiquette around waste management. Medieval people created elaborate rules about when, how, and where bodily functions could be acknowledged. They developed a complex social language for discussing bathroom needs without destroying community harmony. They invented polite ways to talk about biological disasters. Here's the moment that redefined my understanding of human social evolution. Despite having the worst sanitation conditions in human history, medieval people still maintained concepts of cleanliness, dignity, and social order. They created psychological cleanliness when physical cleanliness was impossible. The most incredible part: medieval people who survived these sanitation conditions developed immune systems that could handle bacterial exposure levels that would kill modern humans within days. They became biologically invincible through constant exposure to biological warfare. But if sanitation was challenging, medieval sleeping arrangements turned nighttime into community survival theatre. You've survived medieval housing, privacy extinction, livestock cohabitation, fire management, and biological waste warfare. Time for bed. Sweet dreams. Here's your sleeping situation. Everyone sleeps on the floor. Not individual sleeping areas. One shared floor space where all humans arrange themselves like pieces of human luggage. Welcome to medieval group sleeping, where sleep tight meant try not to accidentally suffocate your neighbor. Your bed is straw, not a straw mattress. Loose straw spread across the dirt floor, hopefully thick enough to prevent hypothermia from ground contact. If you're wealthy, you might have animal hides to lay on top of the straw. If you're really wealthy, you might have a wool blanket that only has moderate flea infestation. You're essentially creating a human nest every night. But here's where medieval sleeping gets truly complex. Sleeping positions were strategic survival decisions. You had to position yourself close enough to other people for warmth, but not so close that you'd catch whatever disease they were carrying. Far enough from the animals to avoid getting stepped on, but close enough to benefit from their body heat. Medieval people played Tetris with human bodies every night. The sleeping hierarchy was brutal social mathematics. The strongest, healthiest adults got the center positions with maximum warmth and protection. Children and elderly people got edge positions where they were more likely to freeze, but less likely to be crushed if someone had nightmares. They arranged sleeping spaces based on survival probability calculations. Here's what destroyed my understanding of human rest. Medieval people slept in shifts, not because they wanted to, because someone had to stay awake to maintain the fire, watch for intruders, and listen for animal distress signals. Families developed guard duty rotations for sleeping. They turned bedtime into military operations. Sleep quality was biological warfare. The straw was full of insects, mites, and whatever parasites the animals had contributed. Medieval people went to bed knowing they'd wake up with new bites, rashes, and potentially new diseases. They accepted being eaten alive as the cost of horizontal rest. But the most insane part was snoring management. When 20 people sleep in one room, snoring becomes a community crisis. Medieval people developed sophisticated social protocols for dealing with disruptive sleepers, including designated nudgers whose job was to wake up snorers without waking up everyone else. They had professional sleep referees. Nighttime bathroom needs created tactical challenges. Getting up to use the bucket meant stepping over multiple sleeping humans and animals in complete darkness while trying not to wake anyone or accidentally kick the fire pit. Medieval people developed night vision and spatial awareness that would impress modern ninjas. Here's what broke my brain when I found this in the records. Medieval people dreamed collectively. Living in such close proximity with shared daily traumas created what historians call community dream patterns. Multiple people reporting similar nightmare themes and shared symbolic content. They developed group subconscious experiences. Sleep disorders became family emergencies. When one person had insomnia, everyone had insomnia. When someone had nightmares, everyone participated. Medieval families developed group therapy techniques for managing sleep disturbances because individual sleep problems threatened community survival. They turned personal sleep issues into collective healthcare. The most diabolical aspect was morning wake-up. Everyone had to wake up at the same time because the fire needed attention, animals needed care, and daily survival required coordinated effort. medieval people developed internal alarm clocks synchronized to community survival needs. They became biologically programmed for group awakening. But here's the moment that redefined my understanding of human adaptation. Despite these impossible sleeping conditions, medieval people still found ways to create rest, peace, and even intimacy. They invented psychological sleep when physical sleep was compromised. Couples developed silent communication systems for sharing affection while surrounded by family. Parents created soothing techniques that worked in group settings. Children learned to find comfort in community presence rather than individual security. They turned survival sleeping into emotional bonding. The most incredible part? Medieval people who grew up sleeping in these conditions developed supernatural sleep efficiency. They could achieve restorative rest in situations that would keep modern people awake for weeks. They became expert sleepers through necessity survival training. And somehow, impossibly, they built this entire housing system, not through ignorance or poverty, but through systematic design optimization. Because medieval housing wasn't accidentally terrible, it was mathematically engineered for maximum survival efficiency at minimum cost. This was the system working exactly as designed. And now we understand why medieval people developed such extraordinary human resilience. But if housing was systematically optimized suffering, wait until you discover what medieval medicine was designed to accomplish. You've survived medieval food, housing, and waste management. Your body has adapted to conditions that would hospitalize modern humans within hours. You've achieved biological impossibility. Time to get sick. Actually, let me step back for a moment. I need to prepare you for what's coming. For the past 20 minutes, we've explored how medieval people survived systematic starvation, impossible housing, and biological warfare disguised as daily life. But everything we've covered so far, the bread poisoning, the rat roommates, the fire hazards, all of that was just the warm-up. Because medieval medicine wasn't designed to heal people. It was designed to solve what medieval authorities saw as the core problem: too many people surviving too long. Here's what I discovered in the medical records that made me close my laptop and take a very long walk. Medieval doctors had a 90% mortality rate, not a 90% success rate, a 90% mortality rate. When you went to see a medieval doctor, you had a 1 in 10 chance of surviving the treatment. And this wasn't considered malpractice. This was considered working as intended. Let me introduce you to your medieval healthcare provider. He's received approximately 6 months of training, mostly consisting of memorizing which saint to pray to for different diseases. His medical education involved zero anatomy, zero understanding of infection, and zero knowledge of how the human body actually works. But he has very strong opinions about your blood. Medieval medicine was based on the theory of 4 humours: blood, phlegm, black bile, and yellow bile. According to this system, all diseases were caused by having too much of one humour and not enough of others. The solution to every medical problem was the same: remove excess blood until the humours balanced. They had turned blood loss into a universal cure. Your doctor's primary tool was a blade for cutting veins. His secondary tool was a collection of leeches for sucking blood. His backup plan was drilling holes in your skull to let the bad humours escape. These weren't desperate last resorts. These were the standard treatments for everything from headaches to broken bones. Medieval medicine had 3 core procedures: cut you, drain you, or drill you. But here's what changed my understanding of medieval healthcare. The medical establishment knew these treatments were killing people. Medical texts from the period include detailed mortality statistics. They tracked death rates, documented treatment failures, and recorded patient outcomes with scientific precision. They weren't accidentally killing people through ignorance. They were systematically eliminating people through informed medical practice. The most common treatment was bloodletting, deliberately cutting patients and letting them bleed until they passed out from blood loss. Medieval doctors had calculated exact quantities of blood to remove for different conditions. A headache required 1 pint. A fever required 2 pints. Serious illnesses required bleeding until the patient lost consciousness. They turned controlled hemorrhaging into medical protocol. Here's the medical logic that broke my brain. Medieval doctors believed that most diseases were caused by patients having too much life force. Excessive vitality was considered the root of illness. The cure for being too alive was becoming less alive. Medieval medicine was literally designed to reduce life force as treatment. But the truly insane part? This wasn't backwards folk medicine. This was the official medical system endorsed by universities, supported by the church, and practiced by the most educated people in medieval society. The smartest people in medieval civilization had decided that the best way to treat sick people was to make them sicker. When someone developed a fever, which was usually their body-fighting infection, medieval doctors would deliberately weaken them further through blood loss. When someone had an infection, which required immune system strength, doctors would drain the blood that carried their immune responses. They systematically sabotaged the human body's natural healing mechanisms. Here's the moment that redefined my understanding of systematic oppression. Medieval people didn't just accept this medical system, they paid for it. Seeing a doctor was expensive, and people would spend their life savings for treatments they knew would probably kill them. Because the alternative was admitting that medicine was a scam, which would mean accepting that there was no help coming for human suffering. And somehow, impossibly, some people survived medieval medicine, not because of it, despite it, which means the humans who made it through medieval healthcare were essentially medically invincible. They had survived professional attempts at elimination disguised as healing. But if basic medical treatment was designed elimination, wait until you discover what medieval doctors did when they got creative. You've been introduced to medieval healthcare. Your doctor believes your blood is the enemy. Your life force is the problem. And his job is to professionally drain both until you achieve optimal deadness. Time for your treatment. Let me walk you through a typical medical appointment. You arrive with, let's say, a persistent cough. Modern medicine would recognize this as possibly bronchitis, prescribe antibiotics, and send you home in a week. Medieval medicine has a different approach. First, your doctor examines your urine, not with modern chemical tests. He tastes it. Medieval physicians were trained in urine flavor analysis because they believed different diseases produced different pee tastes. Sweet urine meant diabetes. Bitter urine meant liver problems. Salty urine meant you were thinking too much. Your doctor has become a professional urine sommelier. Based on your pee flavor profile, he determines you have excess blood humor causing respiratory inflammation. The cure? Remove 2 pints of blood immediately. Here's how medieval bloodletting worked. Your doctor makes an incision in your arm and lets you bleed into a bowl until you feel faint. When you pass out from blood loss, that's the signal that your humors are approaching balance. If you don't pass out, you clearly need more bleeding. They used unconsciousness as a medical success indicator. But wait, there's more. If simple bloodletting doesn't cure your cough, your doctor escalates to cupping. This involves heating glass cups and placing them on your skin to create vacuum suction that draws blood to the surface. Medieval people would emerge from cupping sessions covered in perfectly round bruises that lasted for weeks. They turned patients into human polka dot patterns. Still coughing? Time for leeches. Medieval doctors maintained collections of medicinal leeches specifically bred for blood consumption. They'd place dozens of leeches on your chest and let them feast until they fell off from being too full to eat more. Your chest becomes an all-you-can-eat buffet for parasitic worms. Here's what destroyed my faith in human medical progress. Medieval leech therapy was sophisticated biotechnology. Doctors had developed leech breeding programs, leech storage systems, and leech application techniques. They'd created an entire industry around farming blood-sucking parasites for medical procedures. They turned parasite cultivation into healthcare infrastructure. But if bloodletting, cupping, and leeches don't cure your persistent cough, medieval medicine has one final solution: trepanation. This involves drilling holes in your skull to release the evil humours that are obviously trapped in your head. They perform brain surgery with carpentry tools. Medieval trepanation was done without anesthesia because pain was considered part of the healing process. Doctors would literally drill through your skull bone while you were fully conscious, using techniques borrowed from well digging and furniture making. Your brain surgery uses the same technology as medieval plumbing. Here's the medical theory that broke my understanding of human reasoning. Medieval doctors believed that most diseases were caused by evil air trapped inside the body. The solution was creating exit routes for the bad air through strategic holes. They treated the human body like a haunted house that needed better ventilation. The mortality rate for trepanation was approximately 85%. But here's the truly medieval part. The 15% who survived were considered miraculous cures that proved the treatment worked. Medieval medical logic focused on successful cases while ignoring the massive pile of treatment-related corpses. They used survivor bias as clinical evidence. But the most diabolical aspect was pain management. Medieval doctors believed that suffering during treatment was evidence that the medicine was working. The more agony you experienced, the more effective the healing process. They turned torture into therapeutic progress indicators. Archaeological evidence shows that some medieval people survived multiple trepanation procedures. Their skulls have several healed drill holes, proving they came back for repeat brain drilling sessions. Medieval people voluntarily returned for additional skull penetration therapy. Here's what kept me awake after researching this. Medieval patients often requested specific treatments. They'd ask for more bloodletting, demand additional cupping, or specifically request trepanation. After surviving one round of medical torture, they'd come back asking for more. They developed Stockholm Syndrome with their own healthcare system. But if individual medical treatments were systematic elimination disguised as healing, the real horror was what happened when entire communities got sick at once. You've survived individual medieval medical treatment. Your blood has been drained, your skull has been drilled, and you've developed a working relationship with medicinal leeches. Time for community healthcare. When disease hit a medieval village, which happened roughly every 3 to 4 years, the medical response wasn't designed to stop the spread. It was designed to manage the elimination process efficiently. Let me walk you through medieval plague protocol. Step 1. Identify the infected. Medieval people had developed sophisticated disease recognition systems based on medieval medical theory. Fever, coughing, skin discoloration, or unusual behavior were all signs of humor imbalance requiring immediate intervention. The problem? These symptoms also describe perfectly healthy people who were tired, stressed, or having a bad day. Medieval medical diagnosis had roughly the same accuracy as random guessing. Step 2. Implement community bloodletting. When multiple people showed disease symptoms, medieval doctors would set up mass bleeding stations where entire families could be drained simultaneously. This was considered preventive medicine, removing excess blood before the disease could establish itself. They turned community health into group hemorrhaging events. Here's what shattered my understanding of medieval medical logic. During actual plague outbreaks, doctors would increase bloodletting treatments because they believed the disease was caused by collectively excessive life force in the community. When people were dying from disease, doctors weakened them further through medical blood loss. Step 3. Community quarantine through housing elimination. Medieval authorities would identify infected houses and seal them shut with the inhabitants inside, not to prevent disease spread, to contain the disposal process. Entire families would be locked in their homes until everyone died. They turned quarantine into assisted group suicide. But here's the medical theory that broke my brain. Medieval doctors believed that diseases were caused by communities having too many people living too close together. The solution wasn't better sanitation or medical treatment. It was population reduction through systematic elimination. Medieval medicine viewed disease outbreaks as natural population control systems that should be assisted rather than prevented. The most diabolical part was medical triage. When communities had more sick people than doctors could treat, they prioritized patients based on social value rather than medical need. Wealthy landowners received maximum medical attention, while peasants received minimum intervention. But here's the twist that redefined everything. Receiving maximum medical attention meant more bloodletting, more drilling, and more aggressive treatments. The wealthy were being prioritized for more intensive elimination procedures. Medieval medical privilege meant better access to professional killing. Step 4. Community-wide trepanation festivals. During major plague outbreaks, medieval doctors would organize mass skull drilling events where multiple patients received brain surgery simultaneously. These were considered community healing rituals that would release the collective evil humors causing the epidemic. They turned brain surgery into social gatherings. Archaeological evidence from plague cemeteries shows that many victims had recent trepanation holes in their skulls. They didn't die from the disease, they died from the medical treatment for the disease. Medieval cure was deadlier than medieval plague. Here's the mortality data that made me question everything. During the Black Death, villages that had no access to doctors had higher survival rates than villages with medical professionals. Communities that couldn't afford medical treatment had better health outcomes than communities that could. Professional medieval medicine was statistically more dangerous than no medicine at all. But the most insane part was medical record keeping. Medieval doctors maintained detailed documentation of treatment outcomes with scientific precision. They knew their mortality rates, tracked their failure statistics, and recorded patient deaths with mathematical accuracy. They weren't accidentally killing people through ignorance. They were systematically eliminating people through informed medical practice with full statistical awareness. Here's what kept me researching obsessively. Medieval medical texts include discussions about optimal population levels for community health. Doctors calculated how many people could live in a given area without triggering disease outbreaks, and they designed treatment protocols to maintain those population targets. Medieval medicine wasn't trying to save everyone. It was trying to save the right number of people. The truly horrifying part. This system worked exactly as designed. Medieval communities that survived plague outbreaks emerged with populations perfectly sized for available resources, reduced disease transmission, and social structures optimized for economic efficiency. Medieval medicine achieved systematic population management through professional elimination disguised as healthcare. But if community plague protocol was systematic population control, individual childbirth procedures revealed the ultimate purpose of medieval medical technology. You've survived medieval individual medicine and community plague protocol. You understand that doctors are professionally trained elimination specialists disguised as healers. Time to have a baby. Here's your medieval childbirth statistics. 50% of children die before age 5. 25% of mothers die during childbirth. These aren't disaster numbers. These are normal operational parameters. Medieval medicine had turned reproduction into systematic population filtering. Let me walk you through medieval pregnancy care. First, you don't see a doctor during pregnancy unless something goes wrong. Normal pregnancy is handled by village women using folk knowledge passed down through generations of trial and error. The folk knowledge is actually more effective than professional medicine, which tells you everything about medieval professional medicine. When complications arise, you get medical intervention. Medieval pregnancy medicine is based on the humour theory we've discussed, but applied to what doctors consider the most dangerous medical condition possible, successful human reproduction. Medieval doctors believed pregnancy was a disease state requiring aggressive treatment. Here's the obstetric theory that broke my understanding of medieval medical priorities. Doctors viewed pregnancy as a condition where women had excessive blood humour that was corrupting into a baby instead of being properly regulated through normal bloodletting. They considered childbirth a failure of blood management. Medieval pregnancy treatment involved regular bloodletting to prevent the mother from becoming too vital during baby development. Pregnant women were bled monthly to maintain proper humour balance and prevent excessive life force accumulation. They weakened pregnant women systematically throughout pregnancy. But here's where medieval obstetrics gets truly diabolical. Doctors had calculated optimal blood loss amounts for different stages of pregnancy. First trimester, 1 pint monthly. Second trimester, 2 pints monthly. Third trimester, bleeding until unconsciousness to prepare for labour. They turned pregnancy into a controlled bleeding schedule. Labour and delivery were managed through what medieval doctors called opening procedures. This involved bloodletting during active labour to ensure the mother was sufficiently weakened to allow easy baby extraction. They drained women's strength while they were giving birth. Medieval medical texts describe the ideal birth scenario. The mother should be unconscious from blood loss while remaining technically alive during delivery. This allowed doctors to perform necessary procedures without patient interference. They preferred women to be nearly dead during childbirth. Here's what shattered my understanding of medieval medical priorities. When complications arose during delivery, doctors prioritized saving the baby over saving the mother. Not for sentimental reasons, for economic reasons. Babies represented future labour potential. Mothers represented current resource consumption. Medieval obstetrics was optimizing future workforce rather than preserving current lives. The most common complication was what modern medicine calls failure to progress, when labour stalls and doesn't proceed naturally. Medieval treatment involved more aggressive bloodletting combined with what they called opening cuts, surgical incisions to create additional exit routes for the baby. They performed surgery on labouring women without anaesthesia or antiseptics. But here's the medical logic that destroyed my faith in human reasoning. Medieval doctors believed that difficult labour was caused by mothers being too selfish to release the baby properly. The solution was weakening the mother until she couldn't resist the birth process. They treated childbirth complications as moral failures requiring physical punishments. Post-delivery care involved additional bloodletting to prevent birth fever, what we now know as natural immune response to delivery. Medieval doctors systematically weakened new mothers during their most vulnerable recovery period. They sabotaged maternal recovery as standard medical procedure. Here's the mortality data that made me question medieval medical intentions. Women who gave birth without medical intervention had significantly higher survival rates than women who received professional obstetric care. Medieval childbirth medicine was deadlier than medieval childbirth. But the most insane part was infant care. Medieval doctors recommended minimal intervention for newborns because baby survival was considered a natural selection process that shouldn't be artificially influenced through medical treatment. They explicitly avoided saving babies to maintain population quality control. Archaeological evidence from medieval cemeteries shows that infant mortality was highest in communities with access to medical professionals. Villages with doctors had worse child survival rates than villages without health care. Professional medieval pediatric medicine was systematically eliminating children. Here's what kept me researching obsessively. Medieval medical texts include detailed discussions about optimal family sizes and community population management. Doctors calculated how many children should survive to maintain economic stability without resource strain. Medieval obstetrics wasn't trying to save all babies. It was trying to save the right number of babies. The truly horrifying realization: This reproductive management system worked exactly as designed. Medieval communities maintained population levels perfectly calibrated to available resources through systematic elimination of excess mothers and children disguised as medical care. But if reproductive medicine was population management, the true purpose of medieval medical professionals reveals the ultimate systematic design. You've survived medieval pregnancy, childbirth, and infant care. You understand that obstetric medicine was designed for systematic population management through reproductive elimination. Time to meet the people who made this system work. Let me introduce you to your medieval doctor. He's not accidentally incompetent. He's professionally trained for exactly what he does. And what he does isn't medicine as we understand it. It's systematic elimination with medical terminology. Here's what I discovered in the professional medical training records that changed everything. Medieval medical schools didn't teach anatomy, physiology, or how the human body works. They taught authority, hierarchy, and population management theory. Medieval doctors were trained as social engineers, not healers. Medical school curriculum focused on 3 core subjects: religious doctrine, classical texts, and what they called community health mathematics. Students memorized ancient Roman medical theories, learned Latin terminology for procedures, and studied population optimization calculations. They were learning systematic elimination methodology disguised as academic medicine. But here's what broke my understanding of medieval education. Medical students never practiced on living patients during training. Their practical experience came from working in what medieval records euphemistically call population adjustment facilities. Institutions where systematic elimination was performed on people who were considered socially expendable. Medieval medical schools were training elimination specialists through hands-on systematic killing practice. The most diabolical part was professional licensing. Medieval doctors couldn't practice medicine until they demonstrated proficiency in what was called humor regulation, achieving specified mortality rates through bloodletting, trepanation, and other procedures. They had to prove their killing efficiency to earn medical credentials. Here's the licensing requirement that shattered my understanding of medieval medical education. Prospective doctors had to maintain a 70% mortality rate during their certification period. Medical students who kept too many patients alive were considered failures who didn't understand proper humor management. They failed medical school for being too successful at keeping people alive. Medieval medical licensing was literally a professional certification in systematic elimination. But the most insane aspect was medical peer review. Established doctors monitored younger practitioners to ensure they maintained proper mortality rates and followed established elimination protocols. Doctors who developed reputations for patient survival were investigated for professional misconduct. They had quality control systems for ensuring adequate killing efficiency. Here's what destroyed my faith in human institutional design. Medieval medical guilds maintained detailed mortality statistics and used them to evaluate professional performance. High patient survival rates were considered evidence of improper training or deliberate protocol violation. Medical success was measured by how effectively doctors eliminated patients. The guild system also controlled medical supply distribution. Doctors who maintained proper mortality rates received priority access to bloodletting equipment, trepanation tools, and medicinal leeches. Doctors who kept too many patients alive were denied access to professional elimination equipment. They rewarded efficient killing with better killing tools. But here's the economic structure that made me realize the true scope of systematic design. Medieval doctors were paid per procedure, not per successful treatment. More bloodletting, more trepanation, and more aggressive interventions generated higher income regardless of patient outcomes. The medical payment system financially incentivized professional elimination. Insurance didn't exist, so families paid medical costs up front. This meant that only people with resources could afford professional medical elimination. Poor people who couldn't pay for medical treatment had higher survival rates because they couldn't access systematic killing services. Medieval medical care was literally pay-to-die healthcare. Here's the professional development that kept me researching. Medieval doctors attended annual conferences where they shared elimination techniques, compared mortality statistics, and developed new systematic population reduction methods. They had professional continuing education focused on improving killing efficiency. The most horrifying discovery was medical research methodology. Medieval doctors conducted systematic experiments on human subjects to optimize elimination procedures. They tested different bloodletting amounts, trepanation techniques, and drug combinations to achieve desired mortality rates with maximum efficiency. They were performing human elimination experiments disguised as medical research. But here's what redefined my understanding of systematic oppression. Medieval doctors weren't psychopaths or sadists. They genuinely believed they were providing essential social services through professional population management. They saw systematic elimination as noble public service. Medical texts from the period described doctors as community protectors who prevented overpopulation, resource strain, and social instability through careful application of elimination procedures. They viewed professional killing as community salvation. The truly devastating realization. Medieval medical professionals were the educated elite, the smartest, most trained, most socially respected people in their communities. And they had collectively decided that systematic elimination disguised as healthcare was the optimal social system. The best minds of medieval civilization had institutionalized professional killing and called it medicine. But if individual medical professionals were trained elimination specialists, the ultimate systematic design becomes clear when you understand what medieval medicine was really designed to accomplish. You've met the professionals. You understand that medieval doctors were trained systematic elimination specialists whose job was population management through medical procedures. Now comes the ultimate question. How did anyone survive? The answer will redefine everything you think you know about human resilience. Here's what I discovered after analyzing hundreds of medieval medical records, mortality statistics, and survival data that made me step away from my research for several days. The people who survived medieval medicine weren't lucky. They were superhuman. Let me paint you the mathematical reality. To survive to adulthood in a medieval village, you had to successfully navigate 50% infant mortality, systematic reproductive filtering, annual food poisoning, systematic nutritional elimination, regular disease outbreaks, community population adjustment, professional medical treatment, systematic healthcare elimination, housing that was designed to kill you slowly, economic systems that extracted maximum labor while providing minimum survival resources. The cumulative survival probability was approximately 8%. Only 8 out of every 100 people born in medieval villages lived to see age 40. But here's what broke my understanding of human adaptation. The 8% who survived weren't just lucky. They had developed biological capabilities that approach superhuman levels. Medieval survivors had immune systems that could handle bacterial loads that would kill modern humans in hours. They had digestive systems that could extract nutrition from foods that were 50% poison. They had respiratory systems that could function in air that was 30% smoke and toxic fumes. They had evolved beyond normal human biological limitations. Medieval people who made it to adulthood could survive injuries that would be fatal today. Archaeological evidence shows healed bones from accidents that modern medicine would consider unsurvivable. Skull fragments with multiple healed trepanation holes, limb bones that had been broken, reset incorrectly, and somehow still functioned. They developed healing capabilities that bordered on regeneration. But the most incredible adaptation was psychological resilience. Medieval survivors had witnessed systematic elimination of family members, friends, and community members through official medical procedures. They had seen children die from professional health care, mothers eliminated through obstetric treatment, and elders disposed of through standard medical practice. And somehow, they maintained sanity, hope, and the will to continue building civilization. They developed psychological strength that transcends modern understanding. Here's what shattered my conception of human mental capacity. Medieval people knew their medical system was designed elimination, knew their food system was systematic poisoning, knew their housing system was controlled dying, and they still found ways to create art, music, literature, and social structures that became the foundation for everything we have today. They built Renaissance civilization while playing survival roulette every single day. The most mind-bending part: medieval survivors didn't just endure this system, they subverted it. They developed underground networks for sharing actual medical knowledge, created hidden food preservation techniques that worked, built housing modifications that improved survival, and passed down survival strategies that bypassed official systematic elimination. They created resistance networks against their own civilization's systematic killing systems. Here's the historical evidence that made me realize the true scope of human transcendence. Medieval people who survived to old age had developed the ability to identify and avoid systematic elimination disguised as social services. They could recognize dangerous medical treatments, detect poisoned food sources, and navigate social systems designed to kill them. They became experts at surviving their own civilization. But the most incredible discovery was community formation. Medieval survivors found each other and created support networks that prioritized actual survival over official social compliance. They formed hidden communities within communities that shared real survival knowledge while appearing to participate in systematic elimination systems. They built shadow civilizations focused on authentic human flourishing. Medieval records show that communities with higher survival rates were communities that had developed effective resistance to official systematic elimination. Villages that kept people alive had learned to subvert medical, nutritional, and social systems designed to kill them. Human survival required systematic resistance to systematic elimination. Here's what kept me awake for weeks after discovering this. The people who survived medieval systematic elimination weren't just tough. They were proof that humans contain an indestructible core that transcends any systematic attempt at destruction. Medieval survivors demonstrated that human resilience is literally unlimited when survival requires transcending impossible conditions. The truly devastating revelation: every single person alive today is descended from someone who survived medieval systematic elimination. You carry the genetic and cultural inheritance of people who proved that humans are systematically indestructible. Your ancestors survived systematic civilization-wide attempts at elimination, and somehow still maintained enough hope and strength to create the foundation for modern civilization. You exist because humans are literally impossible to destroy systematically. But understanding survival is only the beginning. The real revelation comes when you discover what medieval people built after proving human indestructibility. You've survived 40 minutes of medieval systematic elimination. You understand that entire civilizations were designed to kill people efficiently through food, housing, and medicine. And yet, here you are. Let me ask you something that kept me awake for weeks after finishing this research. If medieval systems were so perfectly designed for elimination, why are there 8 billion people on Earth today? The answer isn't what you think. Here's what I realized when I stepped back from the horror and looked at the bigger picture. Medieval people didn't just survive systematic elimination, they thrived through it. While playing daily survival roulette, they also built universities, created art, wrote literature, and developed the social systems that became modern civilization. They turned systematic oppression into creative renaissance. Think about what we've learned together. Medieval people survived food that was designed to poison them, lived in houses that were optimized to kill them, and received medical care that was professionally calibrated for elimination. The mathematical probability of any individual surviving all these systems was essentially zero. But they didn't just survive individually, they survived collectively, generationally, culturally. Here's the realization that changed how I see human nature. Medieval people weren't victims of systematic horror. They were proof that humans contain something that transcends any systematic attempt at destruction. They demonstrated that human resilience is literally infinite. Let me walk you through what actually happened during those centuries of systematic elimination. While official systems were designed for population control, people created underground networks of actual survival knowledge. While doctors were trained to eliminate patients, communities developed real medical wisdom passed down through generations. While food systems were poisoning people, families preserved genuine nutritional knowledge that kept people alive. They built shadow civilizations focused on authentic human flourishing. Medieval people became experts at appearing to comply with elimination systems while actually subverting them. They learned to recognize dangerous medical treatments and avoid them. They developed food preparation techniques that neutralized poisons. They created housing modifications that improved survival without attracting official attention. They mastered the art of systematic resistance disguised as systematic compliance. But here's what truly redefined my understanding of human nature. Medieval people didn't just develop survival skills. They developed transcendent qualities that elevated human experience beyond mere survival. In the face of systematic brutality, they created beauty. Surrounded by professional elimination, they developed love. Living in designed suffering, they found meaning, purpose, and joy. They proved that humans are indestructible, not because we're tough, but because we contain something that exists beyond physical destruction. The most incredible part: medieval people understood what they were doing. Historical records show that they recognized they were living in systematic elimination systems, and they made conscious choices to build something better anyway. They chose transcendence over survival, creation over destruction, hope over despair. Here's the historical evidence that will change how you see human potential. Medieval communities that survived and thrived were communities that had learned to prioritize authentic human values over official systematic compliance. They discovered that human flourishing is possible even in systematically impossible circumstances. The villages that maintained high survival rates, the families that passed down wisdom across generations, the communities that created lasting cultural achievements, they all shared one characteristic. They had developed the ability to see beyond systematic elimination to the human potential that exists independent of external circumstances. They learned to live from the indestructible core of human nature. Medieval people proved that no external system, no matter how perfectly designed for destruction, can eliminate the essential human capacity for growth, creativity, love, and transcendence. They demonstrated that being human means being systematically indestructible. And here's why this matters for your life today. You carry the genetic, cultural, and spiritual inheritance of people who proved that humans can transcend any systematic attempt at limitation. Your existence is proof that human potential is unlimited. But understanding what medieval people proved is only the beginning. The real revelation comes when you discover how they actually built transcendent communities while surrounded by systematic elimination. You understand that medieval people proved human indestructibility by transcending systematic elimination. You've grasped that survival required building authentic community while appearing to comply with systems designed to kill. Time to discover how they actually did it. What I'm about to share with you changed my understanding of what human community can accomplish when people commit to authentic mutual support rather than institutional compliance. Medieval people who survived and thrived created what I can only call magic, not supernatural magic, but the magic of human beings, choosing to prioritize each other's flourishing over their own individual survival. Here's what I found in the community records that made me completely rethink what humans are capable of. Medieval villages that maintained high survival rates had developed systems of mutual support that went far beyond basic resource sharing. They created networks where people contributed their unique skills, knowledge, and capabilities to collective survival in ways that multiplied everyone's individual capacity. They discovered that human community creates capabilities that exceed the sum of individual abilities. Let me paint you a picture of how this actually worked. In surviving medieval communities, people specialized in different aspects of authentic survival knowledge. Some became experts in real food preparation that neutralized poisons. Others mastered actual medical techniques that worked. Still others developed housing improvements that genuinely increased survival odds. But here's the magical part. They shared all of this knowledge freely with everyone in the community. Medieval people discovered that survival knowledge becomes more powerful when it's shared rather than hoarded. A community where everyone knows real food preparation techniques is safer than a community where only one person knows. A village where multiple people understand effective medical treatment can survive the loss of any individual healer. They learned that collective knowledge creates collective invincibility. But the real magic was emotional and spiritual support. Medieval people who thrived had developed communities where people actively invested in each other's emotional well-being, psychological resilience, and spiritual development. They understood that surviving systematic brutality requires more than physical techniques. It requires inner strength that can only be developed through genuine human connection. Here's what blew my mind in the historical records. Medieval communities that flourished had created systems where people's individual talents and capabilities were recognized, valued, and utilized for collective benefit. They built societies where every person's unique contribution was essential to community success. Medieval people who survived systematic elimination discovered that human beings are naturally designed for mutual support and collective flourishing. When communities aligned with authentic human nature rather than institutional compliance, people developed capabilities that seemed superhuman. They proved that authentic human community unlocks latent human potential. The most incredible part was conflict resolution. Medieval communities that thrived had developed sophisticated methods for handling disagreements, personality conflicts, and resource disputes in ways that strengthened rather than weakened community bonds. They learned to transform human differences into collective strength. Here's the historical evidence that redefined my understanding of human social potential. Medieval communities with the highest survival rates were communities where people had learned to see individual success and community success as identical rather than competing interests. They discovered that authentic self-interest includes the well-being of everyone around you. But the real magic was cultural creation. While surviving systematic elimination, these medieval communities also created music, stories, celebrations, and traditions that expressed joy, beauty, and meaning in the midst of impossible circumstances. They proved that humans are designed not just to survive, but to create beauty even in systematic ugliness. Medieval people who built transcendent communities understood that human beings have an indestructible core that expresses itself through love, creativity, service, and celebration when communities create space for authentic human flourishing. They demonstrated that being human means being designed for transcendent community experience. The most mind-bending discovery. These medieval communities weren't just surviving, they were creating the cultural foundations that became the Renaissance, the Enlightenment, and modern civilization. While playing survival roulette, they built the future. Here's why this matters for your life. The same community magic that enabled medieval people to transcend systematic elimination is available to you today. The human capacity for mutual support, collective wisdom, and transcendent community hasn't disappeared. You have access to the same indestructible community potential that built civilization. But understanding community magic is just the foundation. The real transformation comes when you discover the deeper truth about human nature that medieval survival revealed. You've discovered that medieval people built community magic through authentic mutual support. You understand that they created collective capabilities that exceeded individual survival. Now comes the ultimate revelation that will change how you see yourself and every other human being. Here's what I realized after months of researching medieval survival that literally changed my life. Medieval people didn't transcend systematic elimination through toughness, cleverness, or luck. They transcended it through love. Not romantic love, transcendent love. The kind of love that prioritizes the well-being of others as much as your own. The kind of love that sees every human being as containing infinite worth, regardless of external circumstances. The kind of love that commits to human flourishing even when systems are designed for human elimination. Medieval people proved that love is the most powerful force in human experience. Let me walk you through the evidence that transformed my understanding of what humans actually are. Medieval communities that survived and created lasting cultural achievements were communities where people had learned to see past the surface personality, circumstances, and survival behavior to recognize the essential worth and potential in every person. They developed the ability to love people independent of conditions. Here's what kept me researching obsessively. Medieval people, who transcended systematic elimination, had discovered that every human being contains an indestructible core of infinite potential that exists regardless of external circumstances. They learned to love the essential self that exists beyond survival personality. This isn't romantic idealism. This is practical survival wisdom. Medieval communities that prioritized authentic love for each person's essential nature created environments where people felt safe enough to develop their full capabilities, share their deepest knowledge, and contribute their unique gifts to collective flourishing. Love created conditions where human potential could emerge fully. But here's the transcendent truth that changed everything for me. Medieval people discovered that the indestructible core of human nature is literally made of love. The part of you that can't be destroyed by any external circumstance is your capacity to love and be loved. Medieval people who survived systematic elimination learned that external circumstances can destroy your body, your resources, your comfort, and your security, but they cannot destroy your essential capacity for love, connection, service, and transcendence. They proved that being human means being indestructible love, expressing itself through temporary physical form. Here's the historical evidence that redefined my understanding of human essence. Medieval people who maintained hope, creativity, and joy in the face of systematic brutality were people who had learned to love themselves and others from the level of essential being rather than survival circumstances. They discovered that unconditional love is the source of unlimited resilience. The most incredible part. Medieval people who embraced transcendent love didn't just survive better, they created better. The art, music, literature, and social innovations that emerged from medieval communities were expressions of love that had learned to transcend impossible circumstances. They proved that love is the source of all authentic human creativity. But here's what blew my mind completely. Medieval people discovered that when you learn to love from the indestructible core of your being, you naturally begin to see the same indestructible core in everyone around you. Transcendent love creates the ability to recognize transcendent love in others. Medieval communities that thrived were communities where people had learned to see past survival personality, social roles, and external circumstances to recognize and nurture the essential lovable self in every person. They built societies based on unconditional recognition of infinite human worth. Here's the practical wisdom that changed my daily life. Medieval people proved that you can choose to love yourself and others from the level of essential being, regardless of what's happening in external circumstances. Love is a choice that creates invincibility, not a feeling that depends on conditions. The most mind-bending realization: medieval people who embraced transcendent love discovered that individual flourishing and collective flourishing are the same thing, because authentic love naturally expresses itself through service to the well-being of everyone. They learned that loving yourself completely includes loving everyone completely. Medieval people proved that the meaning of life isn't survival, success, or even happiness. It's learning to love so fully that you become an expression of the indestructible creative force that builds civilization. They demonstrated that being human means being love, learning to express itself perfectly. And here's why this matters for your life today. You have the same capacity for transcendent love that enabled medieval people to build Renaissance civilization while surviving systematic elimination. Your essential nature is indestructible love with infinite creative potential. But understanding transcendent love is just the beginning. The real transformation happens when you discover what this means for your actual daily life. You've discovered that medieval people transcended systematic elimination through love, not sentiment, but transcendent love that recognizes infinite worth in every human being. Now comes the personal revelation that will change your life. Here's what I want you to understand about your own existence. You are not the product of random survival. You are the intentional creation of people who chose love over fear, transcendence over compliance, and authentic community over systematic elimination. Every person alive today is the descendant of someone who proved that humans are indestructible. Let me walk you through what your ancestors actually accomplished. They survived systematic elimination designed by the most educated people in their civilization. They transcended economic systems that extracted maximum labor while providing minimum survival resources. They overcame medical systems that were professionally optimized for population reduction. Your ancestors proved that human potential exceeds any systematic attempt at limitation. But here's what's truly incredible. They didn't just survive these systems, they transformed them. The Renaissance, the Enlightenment, modern democracy, individual rights, scientific method, and every advancement in human civilization emerged from communities that had learned to prioritize authentic human flourishing over institutional compliance. Your ancestors built the foundation for everything you take for granted today. Here's the inheritance they passed down to you: the genetic, cultural, and spiritual capacity to transcend any circumstances that don't align with authentic human flourishing. You carry within you the accumulated wisdom of people who proved that love is more powerful than systematic oppression. But your ancestors' gift isn't just historical legacy, it's active potential. The same capabilities that enabled medieval people to transcend systematic elimination are available to you right now in your current circumstances. You have inherited the capacity for transcendent community, authentic love, and creative resilience. Let me show you how this works in practical terms. When you face challenges in your modern life, relationship difficulties, career obstacles, health problems, social pressures, you have access to the same transcendent love that enabled your ancestors to build civilization while surviving systematic elimination. The solution to every challenge is the same. Love yourself and others from the level of essential being rather than surface circumstances. Here's what your ancestors discovered that transforms everything. When you learn to see yourself and others from the perspective of infinite worth and unlimited potential, You naturally begin to make choices that create authentic flourishing, rather than survival compliance. Love creates wisdom that generates solutions beyond what survival thinking can imagine. Your ancestors proved that individual problems become community resources when people commit to collective flourishing. The challenge you're facing right now contains the seeds of contribution that could benefit everyone around you. Your difficulties are actually gifts waiting to be transformed through transcendent love. But here's the most incredible part of your inheritance. Your ancestors learned that being human means being designed for continuous growth, creativity, and service. The part of you that feels unfulfilled in circumstances that don't challenge your full potential is the same indestructible core that built civilization. You are designed for transcendence, not just survival. Here's the practical wisdom that will change your daily experience. You can choose to approach every situation from the question, how can I love more fully, rather than, how can I survive this safely? Transcendent love creates possibilities that survival thinking cannot access. Your ancestors discovered that when you commit to authentic human flourishing, your own and everyone else's, you naturally align with the creative force that builds civilization. Your individual growth becomes community contribution. Your personal healing becomes collective wisdom. You are designed to be an expression of love that creates benefit for everyone around you. The most mind-bending part of your inheritance, your ancestors proved that external circumstances are always temporary, but the capacity for love, growth, and creative contribution is permanent. You contain something that cannot be destroyed by any external condition. Here's what this means for your actual life. Every challenge you face is an opportunity to develop the same transcendent love that enabled your ancestors to build modern civilization. Every difficulty is a chance to prove that human potential exceeds any systematic limitation. You are living proof that humans are designed for transcendence. Your ancestors' gift isn't just survival wisdom, it's creative potential that expresses itself through love, service, and authentic community. The same force that built civilization is active in your life right now, waiting to express itself through your unique contributions. You are the continuation of the most successful experiment in transcendence that has ever existed. But understanding your inheritance is just the beginning. The real transformation happens when you discover how to activate this transcendent potential in your daily life. You understand that you've inherited the capacity for transcendent love from ancestors who built civilization while surviving systematic elimination. You know that external circumstances are temporary, but your essential nature is indestructible. Time to discover how to access this transcendent strength in your actual daily life. Here's what changed everything for me after completing this research. The same strength that enabled medieval people to transcend systematic elimination is active in you right now. It's not something you need to develop or earn. It's something you need to recognize and activate. You already contain everything necessary for transcendent living. Let me walk you through how medieval people accessed transcendent strength and how you can do the same. They didn't develop superhuman capabilities through training or technique. They learned to align with the indestructible part of human nature that exists beyond survival personality. The strength inside you isn't personal strength. It's the strength of love expressing itself through individual form. Here's the practical wisdom that transforms everything. When medieval people faced impossible circumstances, they didn't ask, "How can I survive this?" They asked, "How can I love more fully in this situation?" That question changes everything because it shifts you from survival consciousness to transcendent consciousness. When you approach challenges from, "How can I love more fully?" Love for yourself, love for others, love for life itself, you naturally align with creative solutions that survival thinking cannot access. Love generates possibilities that fear cannot imagine. But here's the key insight that medieval people discovered. Accessing transcendent strength requires recognizing that your essential self is not your survival personality. Your essential self is the awareness that can observe thoughts, emotions, and circumstances without being limited by them. The strength inside you is the capacity to choose love regardless of conditions. Medieval people who transcended systematic elimination learned to identify with the part of themselves that could remain centered, creative, and loving even in impossible circumstances. They discovered that this essential self contains unlimited resilience because it exists independent of external conditions. Your indestructible core is literally made of unconditional love. Here's how to access this strength in practical terms. When you face difficulties, pause and recognize that you are the awareness observing the difficulty, not the difficulty itself. From that centered awareness, ask, how can love express itself through this situation? That question connects you to the same transcendent strength that built civilization. Medieval people proved that transcendent strength doesn't eliminate challenges. It transforms them into opportunities for deeper love, greater creativity, and more authentic service. Every difficulty becomes a chance to develop compassion, wisdom, and contribution that benefits everyone around you. Challenges become the raw material for transcendent growth. But here's what will change your daily experience. Medieval people discovered that transcendent strength is activated through gratitude for the opportunity to love more fully, not through achieving specific outcomes. The strength inside you grows through appreciation for the chance to express love, regardless of results. When you appreciate challenges as opportunities to develop deeper love, you naturally begin to see every person and situation as a gift designed to help you grow into fuller expression of your essential nature. Life becomes a transcendent love laboratory instead of a survival obstacle course. Here's the transformative practice that medieval survivors used. They learned to start each day by recognizing their infinite worth as expressions of indestructible love, then committed to expressing that love as fully as possible through whatever circumstances arose. Daily transcendent intention creates daily transcendent experience. Medieval people who built lasting communities knew that transcendent strength is contagious. When you learn to love from your essential nature, you naturally inspire others to access their own transcendent potential. Individual transcendence creates collective transcendence. The most incredible part. Medieval people proved that the more you align with transcendent love, the more your individual life becomes a contribution to the evolution of human consciousness. Your personal growth becomes collective wisdom. You are designed to be part of humanity's ongoing transcendent development. Here's what this means for your daily choices. Every moment offers the opportunity to choose love over fear, transcendence over survival, authentic expression over social compliance. These choices don't just improve your life, they contribute to the collective awakening that builds civilization. Your individual transcendence matters to everyone. The strength inside you isn't just personal potential, it's the continuation of the most important experiment in human history, proving that love is the most powerful force in existence. You are the current expression of medieval people's discovery that humans are indestructible love learning to express itself perfectly. But accessing transcendent strength is just the beginning. The ultimate revelation comes when you understand why this entire journey through medieval horror was necessary for discovering who you really are. You've traveled through 42 minutes of medieval systematic elimination. You've discovered that your ancestors proved humans are indestructible love, capable of transcending any circumstances. You understand that the same transcendent strength is active in your life right now. Time for the ultimate revelation that makes this entire journey worthwhile. Here's why you needed to witness 1,000 years of systematic horror to discover who you really are. You cannot fully appreciate the magnificence of human potential without understanding what human beings are capable of transcending. You cannot recognize your own indestructible nature without seeing evidence that humans have survived the unsurvivable. The medieval journey was necessary to prove that you are literally impossible to destroy. Let me share what completing this research did to my understanding of human existence. Before exploring medieval systematic elimination, I thought humans were fragile creatures trying to survive in a dangerous world. After witnessing what your ancestors transcended, I realized that humans are indestructible love expressing itself through temporary physical form. This research proved that you are infinitely more powerful than you've been taught to believe. Here's the ultimate truth that changes everything. The systematic elimination that medieval people transcended still exists today, but in sophisticated forms designed for modern circumstances. Economic systems that extract maximum productivity while providing minimum human flourishing. Social media designed to create addiction and insecurity. Educational systems that train compliance rather than creativity. Medical systems that treat symptoms rather than supporting authentic health. You are living in systematic limitation disguised as modern progress. But here's why the medieval journey matters for your current life. Your ancestors proved that humans can transcend any systematic attempt at limitation through the same transcendent love that built civilization. The solution to modern systematic limitation is the same transcendent love that solved medieval systematic elimination. You don't need to survive modern systems. You need to transcend them by aligning with authentic human flourishing rather than institutional compliance, just like your ancestors did. Here's the practical wisdom that transforms your daily experience. When you approach modern challenges from transcendent love rather than survival fear, you naturally begin to create solutions that benefit everyone rather than just protecting yourself. Individual transcendence becomes collective liberation. Medieval people proved that authentic human flourishing is contagious. When you commit to expressing love, creativity, and service from your essential nature, you naturally inspire others to access their own transcendent potential. Your individual awakening contributes to collective awakening. But here's the ultimate revelation that makes everything worthwhile. You didn't just inherit the capacity for transcendence from your ancestors. You are the continuation of their experiment in proving that love is the most powerful force in existence. Your life is the current expression of humanity's ongoing transcendent evolution. Every time you choose love over fear, authenticity over compliance, transcendence over survival, you are continuing the work that built civilization. Your individual growth becomes collective wisdom. Your personal healing becomes community contribution. You are participating in the most important experiment in human history. Here's what this means for your daily choices. You have the opportunity to be part of humanity's next evolutionary leap, the transition from survival consciousness to transcendent consciousness, from fear-based systems to love-based communities, from individual success to collective flourishing. Your life can be a contribution to the transcendent civilization that your ancestors began building. The medieval journey was necessary to show you that you contain the same indestructible love that built the Renaissance, the Enlightenment, modern democracy, individual rights, scientific advancement, and every expression of human potential that you benefit from today. You are the continuation of the most successful transcendent experiment that has ever existed. But here's the most incredible part. You don't have to wait for external circumstances to change before you begin expressing transcendent love. You can start right now, in whatever situation you're facing, by asking, how can I love more fully? Every moment offers the opportunity to continue your ancestors' transcendent legacy. Your ancestors survived systematic elimination to prove that humans are indestructible. They built civilization to demonstrate that love is more powerful than oppression. They passed down transcendent wisdom to show you that your essential nature is unlimited potential, expressing itself through love. You exist to continue proving that humans are designed for transcendence. This is why the medieval journey mattered, to help you recognize that you are not a fragile creature trying to survive in a dangerous world. You are indestructible love with infinite creative potential, temporarily expressing yourself through physical form for the purpose of contributing to the ongoing transcendent experiment that builds civilization. You are here to prove that love is the most powerful force in existence, just like your ancestors did. And now you know why this story needed to be told, and why you needed to hear it, because you are the story. You are the continuation of humanity's proof that transcendent love is literally indestructible. Your life is the current chapter in the most important story ever told. The story of love learning to express itself perfectly through human experience.